At DC, we are aiming to be disciples of Jesus. Isn't disciple just another way of saying Christian? Yeah, in one way, yeah, a little bit like saying Christian, but it's not at the same time. I mean, they both are referring to basically the same people, but not always are they understood to be the same thing. So yeah, let me break it down for you. A disciple is a student. A disciple is a learner. And back in the days of Jesus, this idea, this concept of having disciples was pretty widespread, that everyone understood the system of a teacher having students. So basically that's what a disciple is. But taking it a step further, the way we might understand what they meant by disciple back in that day is that a disciple was an apprentice. So you had a master or someone who was experienced or an expert in a particular craft, and that person would call to himself disciples. He would call to himself apprentices. He'd call to himself people who are going to do one day precisely what he is doing. Now it's all starting to click, isn't it? Jesus made disciples. Jesus called disciples. He trained people to go on and carry on what he was doing in his ministry. To be a disciple is to say, show me the way and I'll follow that way. We all want to be good people, but following Jesus isn't just about being a good person. Though I'm thoroughly convinced that in following Jesus, you're going to make better decisions, you're going to do greater things, and that you're going to find your truest purpose in life and what you are meant for, what you are created for. But it's not just about being a good person. It's about surrendering your life to Jesus. Which brings us back to this idea of being an apprentice. Jesus is the model. He is what we are aiming and aspiring to be. If you're an apprentice, your job is really to observe and to watch and try to mimic everything that your master tradesman does. And so to be a disciple is to watch Jesus, mimic Jesus, do what Jesus is doing, and that ultimately, that if Jesus were in your shoes, you're doing precisely what he would be doing if he were there. Great news is, Jesus left heaps of blueprints for us to follow as disciples and apprentices of him. Things like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your enemies. Forgive others if you want God to forgive you. Be welcoming of children and those who are young or developing in their faith. He also commands that we always be ready to serve. And lastly, he commanded us to go out and help others learn to follow him. These are just a few of the commands that Jesus has, and by doing these things, we're not only becoming more like Jesus, but I'm convinced you're going to be making better decisions for your life, you're going to do greater things, and that ultimately you're going to find your truest and most fulfilling purpose for why you were made and why you're here. Following Jesus is going to be a daily task. It's waking up every day and saying, all right, if you were in my shoes today, Jesus, what would you do? And it's looking through Scripture, it's praying, it's meditating, it's asking, how can I apply your word into my life today? So when you think of being a disciple as an apprentice, it makes so much more sense. You're not working alone, and Jesus is the blueprint that we're aiming for. Be that apprentice, follow Jesus in all that you do.